We're live, Barrows. Thank you, everybody, for coming out to another session of the House Committee on Finance. It should be an interesting evening, and I appreciate your attendance, whether you're here in the building with us or whether you are in your offices or at home. Everybody's information is important to us. Mr. Clerk, would you please establish a quorum by calling the rolls?
Chairman Abney.
Present.
Vice Chair Slater. Vice Chair Mazakowski. Representative Amore.
Present.
Representative Baginski.
Present.
Representative Barrows.
Present.
Representative Diaz.
Present.
Representative Edwards. Representative Hull.
Present.
Representative Nadone. Representative O'Brien. Representative Quartucci. Representative Ruggiero.
Present.
Representative Tabone. Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. We do have a quorum. Could I get a motion to hold bills 5456, 5687, 5791 for further study, please?
Second.
It's been moved and second. It's moved by Rep Diaz, Chairwoman Diaz, and second by Rep Bella Wilkinson. Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson. I'm getting all of the titles as we come. A lot of chairwomen. It's a good thing.
Thank you, my sister.
Okay, could you please call a roll on that? Hold on.
5951, is that what it is? Did you say 5951 as the last bill?
5951 for further study.
We ready?
Is that the same one you had?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Chairman Abney?
Yes.
Vice Chair Slater? Vice Chair Mazakowski? Representative Amore?
Yes.
Representative Baginski?
Yes.
Representative Barrows?
Yes.
Representative Diaz?
Yes.
Representative Edwards? Representative Hull?
Yes.
Representative Nadone? Representative O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay. Representative Quartucci? Representative Ruggiero?
Yes.
Representative Tabone? Representative Ella Wilkinson?
Yes.
Okay. We're all set.
Thank you again, Mr. Clerk. Tonight, as usual, I'll just do a short opening and explain that what we just accomplished was holding bills for further study, which means that the bills are still active, and after the hearing, if we need to do any work on those bills, we do it at that point. That's really what holding bills for further study means. Then after that, we will get a staff presentation by Sharon and the fiscal staff, and then we will have an opportunity, if we want to ask questions of Sharon during her presentation and certainly afterwards. After the staff presentation, we are going to go to the bills. We have 3 bills on hand tonight, and we will have the sponsors come in. People have to remember that even though this is a Finance Committee hearing, some of our members may be in other hearings at the same time. So we'll try to make sure that we get everybody down at approximately the same time. Once that occurs, we will then go into the administration, who will be here to answer any questions that Sharon could not answer, or questions that is in their purview to do that. Then we will go to the telephones. And I say again, one of the most important things we do is to have our guests call us from their homes or places of business, wherever they are, to give us their testimony, because that's absolutely critical and important. But what we do ask is that because we're in a different mode of communicating, that if you are at home, please turn your televisions down so we won't get a backlash of hearing. And then please to keep your comments, because the people who are calling in by phone are generally calling in because you are for or against a bill or an item. And it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes to alert us to what that is. The sponsors of the bills do have a little more time to make sure that they get all of their information out. But if you're calling in as a witness, just because we like to make sure we can get everybody in, we would hope that you would help your partners out by making sure that your comments are short and they are brief but to the point. We also get a lot of information from those of you who send in writings. I'm holding up now probably 50 letters that we've got coming in for different parts of this. So we do read them, and those are all on the website. So the information gets to us, but hearing from the public is important, but it is something we have to make sure we give everybody a chance to do. So with that said, Sharon?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. On tonight's agenda, 2 articles from the governor's fiscal 22 budget are before you, as well as the 3 bills the chairman noted. All of them have to do with either economic development or housing. On the economic development article, there are some distinct programs that are being modified, as well as a number of sunsets that are being extended, and we will take you through each item. The first item has to do with engineer licensing. Under current law, engineering graduates are licensed as professional engineers or engineers in training first, and there are provisions for getting that certification. And the licensure is subject to exams, experience, and quality of work. And the engineering program graduates are subject to the same rules whether they're graduated from a program that's accredited by the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology Standards, ABET. Engineering technologist training is similar but not equivalent, and ABET also accredits these programs. And there are a number of Rhode Island colleges and universities that offer accredited programs listed here. What Article 9 of the governor's budget does is it proposes new licensure standards that expands opportunities to engineering technologists. So it offers a pathway for ABET accredited graduates only to become certified as engineers. And the budget assumes that by expanding folks who are eligible for this certification, there will be about $100,000 in new license fees in addition to expanding folks who have this standard. Just very quickly, what are the changes laid out in this graphic here under current law? Folks who graduate from an engineering program have the same requirements for experience, whether it's accredited through ABET or not. Article 9 would add 2 years to those that are not accredited through ABET. And then Article 9 adds an opportunity for engineering technologists to get this engineering certification if the program they graduate from is ABET accredited after 8 years of experience. So those are the changes with respect to engineering licensing. Moving on to some economic development programs. As we've summarized in any number of forums, there are about 15 programs that originated back in the 2015 session, having to do with implementing a new economic development strategy. Over the next several sessions, changes were made to those programs, some added, and sunsets were extended. What the 22 budget does is it adds funding to some of these established programs, modifies a couple of existing programs, and then extends sunsets for all the programs to the end of December of 2022, which would align with the close of the current 4-year gubernatorial term that Governor McKee is serving out. We showed this slide to you here with the funding over the last several years for some of these programs, so I'll just repeat that here for you. And 2 of the existing programs that are being modified from that original crop are bolded here for your focus. One of them is Rebuild Rhode Island tax credit. Just to recap, for those of you who are familiar but maybe not with the details, these are credits for real estate developments equal to either 20% of the project costs or the funding gap of doing this project and what it'll make, whichever is less. There is a provision to get more if the project meets a certain criteria for sustainability, affordability, or some other provisions in the law. Projects are capped at $15 million. There is a separate cap for a project on parcel 42 of $25 million. That project has not started yet. These can be redeemed over 5 years. The credits are transferable and refundable at a lesser value. Projects that participate in rebuild may also get a sales tax exemption as part of the financing package. Under rebuild, this has changed a few times. The first time it changed was to put a cap on the total amount of credits that could be issued, and that was $150 million. And that was one of the bigger changes. There were other language modifications as well. The 2019 Assembly raised the cap to $210 million. And it also required that when sales tax exemptions were giving out, that had to be paid for within the funds that are set aside to pay for the credits and within this cap. And as I mentioned, there's a distinct $25 million cap for the project contemplated for parcel 42. Should that go forward, that is outside the $210 million. So if that goes forward, the cap is really $235. The project thresholds, there are project thresholds around cost and the minimum square footage. Those are listed here just for your information of the kinds of projects that may get, that have been funded and that are available to be funded. As I mentioned, these credits are paid out over a period of 5 years. The state has been setting aside money to pay for those credits when they're taken so that it's not disruptive to the budget. The funds are budgeted and set aside. There's currently about $67 million set aside from prior appropriations, and the budget itself, that should say fiscal 22, has $22.5 million. In fact, $22.5 million was set aside for fiscal 21, and the same amount is in fiscal 22. The approved credits so far against that $210 million cap is $183 million. And so that means there's not a ton of room left within the original cap. The program sunsets as of June 2021. Now, what the governor proposes to do, as I said, is increase the cap by $30 million to $240 million and add 18 months to the life of the program. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, it continues to fund $22.5 million to be able to pay for these credits, bringing the total amount set aside to $89.7 million. Looking at the out-year forecast, where funds are projected that are going to be needed, these go up in the next few years to set aside a proper amount of money to close to $30 million annually. And then that starts to drop down a little bit as more of them are paid off. But to give you a little more of a picture of the situation, this slide here shows you how much has been committed of the original 210. So the committed is about the 180 versus what's left to be able to commit at 27 million. In terms of how much of the 210 million funding has been set aside, you can see it's less than half. So although most of the money's been committed, less than half of the money has been set aside to pay for it. So that kind of just shows you where we are in terms of making sure this is properly funded. With the governor's proposed increase in 30 additional million in credits, those numbers change a little bit, but you get the picture, is that there'd be ability to issue another almost 60 million in credits total, and then again the unfunded piece goes to 150 million, and that would be set aside over several years. So over time, as the credits are redeemed, the money set aside for them drops, and you have to keep making sure that there's enough to pay for that. So that's kind of a little more of a graphic depiction of the program. Sometimes it's hard to follow all of these numbers, but we just want to get a sense of how much you've set aside, how much obligation has already been made that you still need to pay for. Moving on to the next program with changes, and that's the Stay Invested in Rhode Island Wavemaker Fellowship. This is a tax credit for up to 4 years of college loan assistance. The credits and the amount and everything is based on degrees and actual loans. This has been implemented as 2-year awards, and as you see in the table below, you can get a maximum of $1,000 for an associate's degree, all the way up to $6,000 for a graduate or postgraduate degree. Applicants must work full-time or have accepted an offer from a company in a specific field. The majority of the credits must be reserved for permanent Rhode Island residents or attendee of a Rhode Island college. A new application period has opened this month, and it'll close next month. What Article 9 does is expands the definition of businesses to include corporations and pass-through entities, financial institutions, and federal agencies. It also repeals the wages subject to withholding requirement. This would allow for business owners paying estimated taxes rather than withholding to participate. And it also contains an amendment to ensure the tax credits are exempt from taxation. Currently, it reads now that only a cash redemption is tax exempt, but it's intended so that the benefit is not then taxable. For a little bit of data on participants and costs so far, we present this table to you where you can see the appropriations made every year in support of it, and then the applicants being the first number each year, and the second one being those who are actually awarded the fellowship. They may not be awarded because they don't qualify. And as we mentioned, the application period has opened again. There was nothing in fiscal 20 distributed. So the next program we're going to move to is one that wasn't part of the original slate of 15 programs developed, but it was instead something that was adopted by the 2019 Assembly of the Small Business Development Fund. And the Assembly authorized the development funds that would be capitalized by outside investors, with half the investors for tax credits against insurance for provable metrics. The other money would come from private investors with no expectation of a tax credit. And then eligible businesses could participate, and they needed to be small businesses. What Article 9 does is make a number of changes to how the program operates and who can participate. It expands the tax types that credits can be taken against, and it also allows them to be transferable. It allows different lenders and many small banks to participate. And it removes the current law that essentially a first-come, first-serve. Once someone satisfies the requirements, they are deemed participants, and it makes this more subject to commerce approval and has some other application process changes. So those are the changes to the economic development provisions, and I'm going to move now on to housing issues. Article 16 deals with housing reorganization, some financial and technical assistance for locals, and then we just like to mention that the voters newly approved the $65 million in bonds, which of course are now showing up in the capital budget. Also, we like to mention that both the December stimulus and the March stimulus came with a significant amount of money to help for rental assistance and then other related assistance, and there's also some separate funds for homeowners. And before we talk about what the changes are, there's a couple of major acts that were passed in the last couple decades that set up the system that is here today that would be revised under this article. One was the Housing Resources Act from 1998. This established the 28-member Housing Resources Commission as the lead entity. It also, within that, included a 4-member coordinating committee, and this sort of establishes the relationship between Rhode Island Housing, the Housing Resources Commission, and sets out all the relationships between the multiple entities involved in housing. The commission functions and responsibilities are outlined here, and it also defines affordable housing parameters. Then you have the Comprehensive Housing Production and Rehabilitation Act of 2004. This has some technical changes and clarifications of the commission's responsibilities, and it also establishes a role for the Division of Planning, which is currently in Department of Administration. This establishes metrics to achieve short and long-term plans, includes housing production in the state guide plan, technical planning assistance, and a number of other things. And this is the 10% affordable housing threshold in here. So just because that's an issue that people often ask about, we've just summarized where cities and towns are to date on that item, where 6 of them have achieved that, 6 more are close, and others not making it to a varying degree. So Article 16 before you creates a new hierarchy. It expands that 4-member coordinating committee to 7 members. It establishes a new deputy secretary for the Executive Office of Commerce as the executive director. So looking at this table here, Rhode Island Housing Chairperson, the Housing Resources Chairperson remain as members. The DOA director is no longer part of it. The Secretary of the Executive Office of Health and Human Services is added. The Secretary of Commerce is added. And 3 state agency or political subdivision members are added. The 28-member Housing Resources Commission will be reduced to 20, including 5 from that coordinating committee, and then 13 members from over a dozen issue areas enumerated in the law. The governor is still selecting the chairperson here. It renames the Office of Housing and Community Development as a division and outlines the programs the division is administering. As you can see, homeless, rental assistance, community development, disaster assistance, and financial assistance to nonprofit and community development organizations. So that's the reorganization piece. The article also establishes housing incentive districts where a local could adopt one by ordinance. And then the coordinating committee we just talked about could provide this district with all manner of assistance, authorized payments for school impacts, and allowing for an offset of new education costs. And this is modeled after programs in existence in Massachusetts. We've summarized, as we did last year when a similar proposal was before you, those Massachusetts programs. Here for your information, they too have a 10% local affordable housing standard. They have zoning districts similar to what's being proposed here, where they're concentrated. They allow for one-time payments to that district, and they also allow for net educational expense offset for communities when new housing is added. And here's a depiction of how much money Massachusetts has actually paid out under this program over the last almost 10 years. And you can see it's the amount paid is in the low millions. Article 16 also establishes a housing production fund to help pay for some of these new initiatives. It would be funded by proposed real estate conveyance tax changes administered by Rhode Island Housing, subject to the guidelines from the coordinating committee. This would provide financial assistance for planning, production, or preservation of housing, as well as technical and financial assistance for municipalities. So real estate conveyance tax, just a quick overview of that. That's a tax on the sale of property. It's expressed as dollars per 500 of property value, but it really works out to about 0.5% tax. But because it's expressed as dollars per 500, that $2.30 is divided up in increments, where 30 cents of it goes to the Housing Resources Commission, which in 2020 equated to $4.6 million. 90 cents goes to state general revenues in 2 forms, essentially. One is to help support distressed communities relief. That's specifically identified as 30 cents. The other 60 cents to the general fund. But for those of you familiar with distressed communities, you can add those 2 numbers that go to the general fund together and see that's almost the whole amount the state gives to distressed communities. So it's very close to the $12.4 million appropriation given now. So it's just an artifact of how that program grew over time. And the municipalities where the property is sold retain $1.10 of the $2.30. So on the 35 or 36 million collected in 2020, municipalities got 17 million, and the state retained the rest, essentially for housing resources and distressed community relief. So what the governor proposes is to establish a second tax tier above the current collections on values over $700,000 and only on residential properties, because of course the current law applies to all sales. So whether it's a commercial property, mixed use, or whatever, the tax applies. So the second tier only applies to residential properties and only the value over $700,000. The entire amount of that second tier would go to this housing production fund. As drafted, this is effective in January, so you get about a half a year showing up in the fiscal 22 budget. Another component of this proposal is to take a piece of the state's share, 16 cents of the 60 or 16 cents of the 90, however you want to treat it, to the new fund. And then essentially annually thereafter, this will generate about $7 million. This combined impact. So looking at the 22 numbers, housing resources number would stay at 30 cents. The current estimate for fiscal 22 is better than 20, and so that's 5.3 million. The state general fund keeps the 30 cents for distressed community relief, and then 44 cents that went down from 60, that's where that 16 cents leaves. That gets you really close to the distressed communities appropriation of 12.4 million. And then the municipality, it keeps the same 110, which is worth about 19.4 million. And then the housing production fund gets the state's 16 cents and then the full $2.30 of the new tier. We kind of show you the math underneath of how you get to that 3 million. And so that's how the housing production fund would be would get its money. For comparison, as often we do in committee, Massachusetts has a conveyance tax. Nearly all of the counties have a tax of effectively about 46%, very close to the Rhode Island level. Barnstable County has a higher one. Connecticut does it a little differently, has that tiered tax rate, and you can see those numbers here, and they are higher. Just quick differences from last year's proposal, because it was, it also complicated changes in organizational structure. That last year's proposal repealed and replaced the entire Housing Resources Act, and it elevated the council, the 7-member group, to be the lead housing authority, and it dropped the Housing Resources Committee down to 17 members. It did still have a conveyance tax component, although it was at a lower tier and applied to all property. And it had a provision exempting affordable housing ownership transfers from the real estate conveyance tax. And as the chairman mentioned, there are 3 other bills on this evening that deal with the housing issue. 2 of them specifically with the real estate conveyance tax, different versions of some of the governor's proposal. One that looks a lot like last year's. And then there's also a proposal from the speaker regarding establishing a deputy secretary of housing. And you will hear about that from the sponsors. Happy to try and answer any questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Rep Barrows, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Sharon, the Wave Maker Fellowship looking to be exempt from the tax credit. Is that, so does the rebuilt RI also get exempt from, get that same exemption or no?
So for the Wave Maker, depending on the tax treatment of essentially this benefit, if Rhode Island tax really attempted to make it tax exempt, I believe this is language to make sure that regardless of how the person gets it, it's tax exempt. On the rebuild, it's a little bit more complicated how a developer shows a credit and whether or not it's subject to tax. Most of them are able to structure all their deals to make sure that they don't pay taxes on these benefits.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Baginski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sharon, I have a quick question about slide 41. I realize this is an unfair question to ask you, but is there any way you can just tell me, oh, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong slide number. It is slide 30. Do cities and towns meet these goals, and how are they enforceable?
Well, 6 cities and towns.
6 out of 39?
So how to read this table is 6 cities meet or exceed the threshold.
Okay.
6 just below the threshold. 13 better than half, but not quite there. And you can see the remaining 14 don't even get halfway there.
So what happens to a city or town that doesn't meet the threshold? Is there a penalty?
I am not aware of a penalty, and certainly I think folks from the housing sphere might want to talk to you about how this is enforced, how it's encouraged. I think some of the proposals here are intended to encourage that as well. So we did, and that's one of the reasons we just put this out here so you can see where people are in that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody else has any questions for Sharon at this time? Sharon, I just, for a point of clarification, I'm back on page 2, slide 3, where it talks about the new 4-year graduates will require 4 years of work experience to get a certificate that we use here in Rhode Island. But that 4 years of that 4 years of work, is that just with an engineering company, or does it have to be specifically in a specific part of engineering? I'm just trying to get a sense of what that really means. You got to have, you graduate, you've got a degree in engineering, but before you can get this particular certification, you have to work as an engineer seemingly for 4 years here in Rhode Island. Doing what?
So I am not going to pretend to be an expert on this, how the certification works in the nitty gritty, but you would start as in training, and then you would move up. So there are standards for this license that you would meet like you do with any other professional standards. So I don't know the exact details of how one moves through that standard. But the idea behind the article is to offer it to more people by expanding the degree programs that would be applicable to getting this.
Yeah, no, I understand. I was just trying to make a determination that if you work for one engineering company or firm for 2 years, for whatever the reason, you went to another one for 2 years, but you were doing something different, would that still count as 4 years worth of engineering experience so that you could get that particular certification? That's the real question, I guess.
Yep, that's a good question, and I'm not going to try and answer it without without looking into that a little further. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Chairman,
Yes. Rep. Amore, I'm sorry, Chairman Amore, I see you there now, sir.
thank you, Chairman, I appreciate it. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon, on the prospective proposed changes to the Small Business Development Fund, are those prospective, Are those for prospective participants? Because there are current participants that have gone through the process as it exists.
It's not drafted necessarily that we read it to grandfather in others, but I think I think the Commerce folks are best to explain what their intent is here.
Okay.
But you're right, there's at least one that's made it through, and there's others that were pending, the current law.
Thank you. I'll save that question and repeat it later on.
Thank you.
I think we all will on some of these as we're trying to get an understanding of it. One other question, Sharon, on the rebuild tax credit. It says the governor proposed, and this is on page 7, slide 14, and I'm looking at the bottom of the page where it says the governor proposes 30 million cap increase. But what's the logic of an 18-month sunset extension? I mean, I don't know what's magical about 18 months compared to 1 year or 2 years or...
Because it would line up with the end of the current gubernatorial term.
Okay, so it's a matter of timing for that. Okay, that helps with that. I think that'll do it. Yeah, I think that'll do it for me on the questions of that. Rep Barrows, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Sharon, a quick question. On the 100 on slide 25, it talks about 152 million in rental assistance. Now, how is that money distributed, and who has the money now, or will have the money?
So, good question. The thing to think about, anything that has the American Rescue Plan attached to it, is the new money that came the new programs that were authorized in March, and where the state is still awaiting some significant guidance from the federal agencies charged with dealing with those. And I'll give you an example. The one right above it, approved at the end of December, the stimulus money, the $200 million, that guidance took a while to come out, and Rhode Island Housing is administering that program and launched a website to start taking applications at the end of March. So you see there's often a several-month lag. I don't want to speak for how this new money is going to be handled, if it's going to be the same entities, different entities. It is a little bit different, and it has a much longer life. There was a little bit more time sensitivity to the original December stimulus. So a lot of that remains to be worked out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my concern was that if the state will take a long time to actually pass on the money, if there was a formula that could be divided to actually make sure the cities in town, in the similar fashion that we've done some of the other calculation to each citizen town getting X amount of dollars, that would be excellent. But thank you very much.
Well, I would, if I could clarify, just we put this here for informational purposes, but one thing the state learned in trying to develop the plan to give out the first $200 million is there are very stringent requirements for who qualifies, how that works, levels of income, documentation, and so that's been a heavy lift to get moving. And I know there's folks on the call who might want to speak to you more about, what they know and what they don't know, and I'm not sure that they're able to divide it up in such a way, but I'm sure there's opportunities to make sure it's distributed evenly.
You're quite welcome. And I do have one last question. I swear it's the last one, Sharon, that I have, if you believe that. It's on page 12, slide number 23, and it has to do with the Article 9 revisions, which on the surface sounds good, but right the middle dot says allows different lenders, many small bank type and others, which is a good thing, and it includes more SBA lenders. It looks like to serve low middle income communities, minority institutions. But the next one says it removes the first come, first serve provision. And my antenna just goes up when I see something like that. And maybe it's a good thing, I just don't know. And then it says participation more subject to commerce approval. I mean, does that mean that they will, and I'll ask that question, that they will be the sole entities that decide how this happens?
I believe that is how the revisions are structured. You may recall that the original bill was very prescriptive in who potential participants were and how it would work. And if you qualified, you were able to do this fund. This opens it up to be a very different program and much more under the discretion of Commerce.
Yeah, and as I said, it could be a very good move. I just don't know that the underserved communities have been underserved, and I'm not sure what it would take to make sure that everybody was on the same playing field. Those are the questions we're going to get later on if this is not handled correctly. So that was the nexus of that. Does anybody else have any questions on out in the screen, members who are coming in remotely before we move on? Okay, if not, then that first third of the hearing is done. So what we're going to do now is that we have 3 bills that, as Sharon explained, it kind of covers a lot of what we were talking about tonight. And the first bill that we have is going to be by our newly minted Speaker, Speaker Sakarchi, who is, I think, making his first appearance as a speaker here for us. So welcome, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. My first appearance as Speaker, but one of many appearances before this fine committee in the past. And you've always done a phenomenal job and continue to do so. So thank you. If it's appropriate, I'd like to have some brief remarks. I'll be happy to answer any questions from any members of the Commission.
Absolutely.
But thank you. I'd like to thank the opportunity for you to present this very important bill before this honorable committee this evening. This bill does 2 things for me that I think are very important for the state as far as for housing. It's about accountability and it's about coordination. This bill would require the Secretary of Rhode Island Commerce Department to hire a Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Housing over the next several months. Somebody who's an absolute expert in the field. The legislature will play no role in hiring this individual. It will be left to Commerce and the governor and the executive, but I would ask them to do a national search to find someone who meets the criteria, who can help coordinate. We have a lot of advocates for housing in the state who do a very good job, including our own Rhode Island Housing, but they're all uncoordinated, and we don't have anybody who coordinates that. And then also, I think it's important that we develop some kind of matrix so we can find out and have accountability and goals. Where are we at the 6-month mark? Where are we at the 1-year mark? We need to know. Housing is a critical element. It affects so many of us in terms of jobs, the economy, just living space. It affects so many people and changes people's lives from the very bottom of the economic spectrum to the very top. And we need some coordination at this. We're going to be looking at all kinds of funding mechanisms. But as Sharon Reynolds said earlier regarding the program, Senator Jack Reed was able to acquire $400 million in rental assistance for the state of Rhode Island. And that is a huge amount for a state the size of Rhode Island. It's an overproportional amount. We're very lucky, and kudos to our entire congressional delegation, but especially Senator Reed. And that money will go to help a lot of landlords and tenants pay their bills, pay their mortgages, pay their taxes, pay their water and sewer bills, etc. So it goes a long way, but that's a temporary one-time fix. We need to have a coordinated policy going forward. There's many bills. This is one piece of a 7-bill package, but this is the beginning of our commitment as a House to look at this issue that affects everybody in every community. And there's so many things that we can do to do this. So I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have, but I think this is a worthwhile endeavor. And I hope the committee would look favorable upon it. And I hope ultimately, if it passes, that Commerce would pick someone with national stature, someone who has experience in the field, who has the credentials in the field to help coordinate and then ultimately appear before this committee and other committees in the House and be accountable to the people of Rhode Island for our efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Boginski would want to be the first question to ask a question of the newly minted speaker. So you're on, Representative
Thank you, Mr.
Boginski.
Chairman. I don't know what you mean by that, but thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, a few minutes ago, I asked Sharon how many communities out of Rhode Island's 39 meet their goals for affordable housing standards, and I was disappointed to hear her reply, which was 6. So I'm thrilled that this legislation would put one person in charge of ensuring cities and towns maintain that effort, and I look forward to his or her first appearance before Chairwoman Serpa.
Thank you very much. It is sad, and it's a combination of a lot of factors. I mean, everybody's for affordable housing, but not in their backyard. Everybody wants it. It's a good goal, but go try to construct it, permit it, approve it, build it, and have people live there. It's a different story. And we need to do something as a state to make sure that either to incentivize it, to help maybe look at our local zoning ordinances so we can make more affordable, more land available for construction or reuse. There's a lot of old factories we could reuse into housing. There's a lot of things we can do. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of federal money through HUD, and we need to take advantage of that. Well, it all starts, they say politics is all local. Well, housing is all local also, and we need to look at this. What can we do in our communities to help construct housing for people who need it so desperately?
Thank you.
Thank you. Rep Barros, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Speaker, so just to follow up on the question I had asked Sharon before, would you support the fact that you just said all politics are local, all housing issues are local issues? Would you support the fact that some of that rental money that we're supposed to be getting, rental assistance, there should be a mechanism whereby the people on the ground in those communities knows the needs of their community? Would you talk to the governor or whoever you need to talk to make sure that at some point when those funds do become available, that cities and towns have a say in terms of how the money is actually dispensed? Because
Are you talking about the rescue money or the Jack Reed money?
Well, I'm assuming that's the part of the $400 million, the 200 and the
The
100.
$400 million is something that passed back in December, and it's been very publicized, and it's open. And the website is relatively easy, and it's up to all of us to make sure our constituents know about it, that if you're renting or you're a landlord and your tenant's not paying, there are things that can be done to help them get assistance, monetary assistance, to help pay the rent. And as far as the CARES Act money, that was the money before that. The rescue money, which is the money that we just got, that, as Sharon Reynolds said, we're waiting for guidance from the U.S. Treasury. There's inside of the rescue money, there is a significant amount of money that will go directly to the cities and towns through the CDBG grant program. That's how it'll be allocated. So the city of Pawtucket, for example, will have their own allocation as well as the state. But yes, you're right. We need to make sure that people know about it. We need to make sure that everybody has a say at that. And I've been asked about the so-called rescue money, and what I say is, this money is not money to be spent. It really isn't. It's money to be invested. And what I mean by that is this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us as a state. I don't believe in our lifetimes we're ever going to see this kind of money ever be given to us by the federal government. We need to be very wise with it. We need to be very judicial with it. The federal government gave us 3 years to spend the money, and we need to do something with this money as a state, with the House, the Senate, and the governor, and the stakeholders. I know the Rhode Island Foundation is gathering ideas. We want to work collaboratively with everybody, but we want to look at this money going forward. What is the best opportunity to help Rhode Island for generations to come? Everybody should benefit from the very bottom to the very top. We need to look at what's the best way to invest this money in the future of Rhode Island. Not spend all of it in 1 year or 2 years, because it'll be gone. And then we're going to have same structural deficits. We need to look at how can we hopefully eliminate some of the structural deficit. How can we use it to invest? And I have no idea what the answer to that is. Is it public-private partnerships? Is it looking at structural deficit? Is it partnering with cities and towns or quasi-government agencies? There's a lot of opportunities we need to look at, and hopefully we'll take our time and we'll do it right as a state, because we're only going to get one crack at the apple.
I agree with you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative.
You're quite welcome. I very rarely make a statement as such, but I do think that having a Deputy Secretary of Commerce is a good idea. I'm on the fence about how much the legislature should be involved in it, but I do think that hopefully one of the things that if this is passed, that the deputy secretary will actually help us define what affordable housing means. I mean, depending on where you live, it can be a very different thing, and because we're a small state that has confined geographical areas in which to do things like that in, because I'm not sure whether affordable housing means building a new house for a person, or whether that means building houses that a person could afford, depending on what they, how they work. The zoning issues, having served on the zoning board for 7 years of my life, I know how crazy that can be at times. So I think there's just a lot that a position like this may be able to help us with if the input of the 75 members, whether we're the ones who hire the person or not, goes into the mix to make sure that person understands what they're dealing with here in Rhode Island, because it's needed. It's a real tough thing, I know, to get the grips on, but I just hope that we have some input into it.
I hope so too, and I think, as Representative Baginski said, through our oversight and through this Finance Committee, we will have whoever that secretary is appear before us regularly to find out what the goals are and if they've met the goals. There's a lot of private money that's available. We need to go after it as a state, from foundation money, grant money, federal money. And you asked about what does affordable housing mean. It's an excellent question, because it means so many different things to so many people. It's a catch-all phrase. It means low-income housing, moderate-income housing, affordable housing, workforce and development housing, elderly housing, Section 8 housing. They could all be considered affordable housing. So there's no one silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. It's going to be a series of steps and a commitment over time to make this issue on the forefront of our conscience as a House of Representatives and as a state, and how we tackle it and how we develop it. And it's not just zoning, and it's not just funding, and it's not just Rhode Island housing or rental assistance. We need to look at this from all aspects of it. And unfortunately, a lot of those communities, Representative Barrow said, or Representative Baginski, I'm not sure about, there's 6 in the inner city core that meet the requirements. But if you go out into the suburbs, a lot of them, they say they're for affordable housing, but then go try to permit one, go try to build one, or go try to construct one. A lot of barriers. So hopefully we can cut through some of those barriers. We can level the playing field, and we can incentivize it. I don't want cities and towns to fear this. I want them to embrace it. I want them to be part of it. Part of the 7-bill package is a total 18-member commission to study land use. We haven't done that in 30 years in Rhode Island. Well, it's time now to look at this. And as long as everybody does their fair share, we're not asking anybody to do more than anyone else. We're asking everybody to do their fair share. We can solve this problem. There are ways we can do it, but we're not even in the ball game. We're not even trying. We don't even have a captain of our team, so to speak. And if this position ultimately gets passed and it gets funded and selected, we'll have a captain of the team who can give us direct orders on how the best way to approach it, and someone who we as a General Assembly can hold accountable through oversight and through finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Any other question? Rep Barris has one more question for you. Or maybe 3.
No, it's, if you may indulge me, but it's more of a statement, a very short statement. Mr. Speaker, as you know, in Rhode Island, every time we have a high office that we're looking for someone to fill that position, we're always going out of state because it just sort of makes Rhode Island small. I get it, but this is an issue that I think Rhode Islanders understand. And there's lots of folks out there that I think who are in Rhode Island who can actually do this job. And so I would certainly hope that at some point we stop importing other people and utilize the expertise that we have in-house.
I'm encouraged. I hope you're right. I hope the person we find, him or her, is from Rhode Island. I was heartened to see that URI selected somebody who was a native Rhode Island to lead the university for the next 10 years. So I'm hopeful. I do believe there's a lot of talent in Rhode Island. There's a lot of talent with city and town planners, in Rhode Island Housing, in the statewide planning office. There are people who I think could, and I'm not going to mention names obviously, but could do the job. somebody who has experience, dealing with HUD, national experience, local experience, regional. So I'm hopeful that that person exists here in Rhode Island, but I want to get the best and the brightest, and I want to tackle this problem. It's just too important to be parochial. But certainly, any Rhode Island comes forward, I encourage them all to show an interest and apply for the position.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from the members here? And then we still have members who are remote. Okay, if not, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the committee, and I know this has been we have a break coming up, but I want to thank all of you for the many, many hours. Of course, Sharon Reynolds and her staff as well. The many hours. So goes the House Finance Committee. So goes the House. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Okay, the next bill we'll hear. So if there are no questions, we'll end the hearing on that, on Bill 5951. The next bill we'll hear is, do we have Rep Speakman in? I think she's here. Yep. Okay, we want to get your bill into play, please. That's Bill 5687. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I so wanted to jump in and second all the things that you said to the speaker in response to his great proposal. I have another housing bill, 5687. I am sorry that I wasn't here to hear Sharon's discussion of the housing part of the budget. The governor has a similar proposal to this one, but I'll just tell you what is this bill sets up a dedicated funding stream for housing, which is something that all other New England states have, but Rhode Island doesn't have, and the governor's proposal is the same. The bill would fund this through an increase in real estate taxes, of the real estate conveyance tax above $500,000. So the rate from 0 to $500,000 would be $230 per $500, and then above 500 it would be an additional $230 for every $500, so $460 above 500,000. I understand the governor's proposal is different from that, and that's how the process works. This is part of the suite of bills that the speaker talked about to address affordable housing and the general housing supply. I won't repeat what has been said about how important housing is to Rhode Islanders, but this bill would provide a reliable funding stream so that developers and builders would know that they can get into this business of building affordable housing and that there will be money there year after year instead of constantly having to go after different grants and relying on the federal government's whims, with all due respect. And it would provide increases in supply in housing, which is a great part of the problem. Having these hundreds of millions of dollars come in to give mortgage relief, rental relief, and relief for expenditures for housing is great. But what this does is allow for an increase in the supply of housing, the stock of housing, which is a real problem in Rhode Island. There are some changes that need to take place in the bill. There's a section at the end about apprenticeships that should not have gotten into the draft. And so there's a sub-A that has been produced by the Senate, Senator Coleman, which would eliminate that section, which never should have gotten in there in the first place. I believe that's called a drafting error, I'm told. It's a whole paragraph, not just a punctuation error. But so I'll leave it there. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Rep. Speakman. Rep. Barros, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Rep. Speaksman, for the bill. Now, it might be an unfair question to ask, like most people tell Sharon, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In reference to availability of land, so to speak, I mean, in the urban area, I mean, there's really not that much. Mm-hmm. So most of this would be incumbent upon some of the folks, some of my neighbors in the suburb to do. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
And there's a program in place for that, which, as Rep. Baginski pointed out in the earlier, when she was speaking with the speaker, is perhaps needs some adjustment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're quite welcome. Are there any other questions of Rep. Speakman on her bill from the audience we have here, or those of you who are at home, the committee? Rep. Nardone, please.
Rep speaking, could you tell me like why you picked 500,000? I know the governor had picked 700,000. Did you do calculate some numbers where 500,000 seemed to work out in your favor? Could you just elaborate on that a little bit? Why you would pick that amount? Because the houses are going up
Yes,
at a pretty high rate right now.
yes, they are.
So 500,000 is almost coming to the point where that's a middle class family would own that. So
And I
if you
think that number would have to be worked on a bit,
Yeah.
quite frankly. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for the question and the answer. Okay, I don't see anybody else on the screen that's got a question for Rep. Speakman on your bill. If not, thanks for introducing the bill.
Thank you.
And the hearing on this particular bill is closed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next bill we will hear is Bill 5456 by Rep. Slater, who is busy at this time. He's got another commitment. All right. What I will do is I will read the bill into the record, and then if you have any questions, you can certainly get a hold of Rep. Slater and get that answers. But this bill 5456 transfers the state's share of the real estate conveyance tax to the Housing Resources Commission's restricted receipt account. So his bill is basically asking for any proceeds to be put into a restricted receipt account. So if you have any questions of Rep. Slater, and if you see him in the hallways and byways, we can deal with that. Okay, great. So that'll end the hearing on Bill 5456. What we will do now, we have two other things we do. We will go to the administration, and it looks like the lead again is, I think it's, we have three: Joe Godega, Stephen Pryor, and Carol Ventura. And I always go to the OMB director first, just to see if the team is assembled in a certain way. And the exercise here is that this is a chance, if you have any questions that were not answered by Sharon, then it can be answered by members of the administration. But to save time, at the same time, I've always asked the members of the administration to be listening for any questions that weren't answered. And as you make your opening remarks, you can then probably try to answer those questions, and then we don't have to continue doing that. So I'm going to go to, and then after that's done, I think we have a list of guests that we need to reach by telephone. So we're doing well. But I'm going to ask Joe if you are assembled in any specific way that would be helpful to us in terms of presentations or remarks from the portions of the bills and the portion that you might have on the articles. Joe?
Sure. Thank you very much, Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Joe Cadiga. I'm the Deputy Budget Officer. Thanks for the opportunity to testify tonight with respect to Articles 9 and 16 of the Governor's recommended budget on economic development and housing. I'm glad to take any questions or bring any requests for follow-up, but I'd also like to introduce some of my colleagues here who can provide answers to some of your more specific questions about some of the focused policy areas that are at issue in these articles. First, we have Stephen Pryor, Secretary of Commerce, who's prepared to make some remarks, and he's also brought with him Jesse Saglio, the President of the Commerce Corporation, and Hannah Moore, Chief of Staff at the Executive Office of Commerce, who are there to assist him and answer any questions that may come up. As the chairman mentioned, we have Carol Ventura, Executive Director of Rhode Island Housing. She intends to make some brief remarks and answer any questions that come up, and also to answer questions on housing-related matters. She'll have with her Mike Tondra, Chief of Housing and Community Development, and Chris Hunsinger, the Assistant Deputy Director for Policy and Research at Rhode Island Housing. And then finally, in case any questions come up, such as the chairman's question on the engineering licensure component, we have a couple individuals from the Department of Business Regulation, Julietta Georgakis, Deputy Director, and Amy Stewart, Deputy Chief of Legal Services, both from DBR. Chairman, if you'd please, I'd like to pass things along to Secretary Pryor to make his remarks, but I will remain on the line to assist with any questions that come up.
Thank you so much. Okay, Secretary Pryor, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Chairman Abney. It's a pleasure to be with you, sir. Great to be with the committee once again. I want to suggest this, if I may, Mr. Chairman. What I'll do is I'll make my remarks by describing the overall economic picture and the overall housing picture and really sketch what we have before you from the administration's perspective, and really then go right into responding to some of the questions. So an abbreviated version of a presentation. Does that sound good, sir?
Absolutely, great tactic. You're on.
Excellent. And then may I ask, as I go into the basic state of play on the economy and housing, do the honorable committee members have a one-pager on economic development, Article 9, and a two-pager on Article 16 related to housing, sir?
Yes, we should. We should have that, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to point you to those honorable members of the committee. Acknowledge my colleagues who are here on the line with me, and I'm going to just dive in and say this. First of all, on the Rhode Island economy, we're very pleased with the fact that Rhode Island, though we have certainly struggled in the course of the COVID crisis, is emerging strong. We need to make sure that we invest to secure that strong recovery and to propel ourselves out of the COVID recession. So I want to just overview a few points. First of all, before the COVID crisis, we had achieved an all-time high number of jobs. Our unemployment rate was at 3.6%. The all-time high number of jobs we'd actually achieved occurred in those monthly intervals 15 times in the course of the past handful of years. Strong economy. Then we took a significant dive, as did the rest of the country. I'm pleased to report to you, Chairman and members of the committee, that when you look at April of 2020 forward, so when the crisis really started and economic data started to come in April, after COVID hit, through to February of 2021, the most recent data available, we've shown the 12th best decrease in unemployment in the United States. And when you look at just December 2020, so the end of the last calendar year through now, the most recent data is February, we've seen the 10th largest decline just in that interval. Our last two quarters, quarter 3 and quarter 4 of economic data, we've shown GDP growth. So these are healthy signs. Moody's ranks the states as to, and rates them in effect, as to they compare to what they call the back to normal index, where the United States is as a whole on getting back to normal pre-COVID in terms of its economic activity. And we're very pleased that in the most recent weekly digest from Moody's, that was last week, came out on Friday, the United States was at 86% return to normal in its economic activity. Rhode Island exceeded that at 88%. Our neighbors were not as well positioned. Connecticut is just below that amount. Massachusetts is only at 78% compared to 88% and ranks in the lowest 3 in the country. New York is dead last at 74%. What I'm expressing to you is there's been a healthy return to normal pace and level of activity, but none of us are satisfied. Governor McKee would be the first to say we have struggling small businesses. We have sectors such as hospitality that are still definitively trying to get back on their feet. And we have so much more to do, which is why we're working so closely in concert with legislative leadership, including Speaker Shekarchi, to introduce new small business grant programming. We just announced one such program yesterday. And why we think, Mr. Chairman, we need to do, if you're looking at the Article 9 summary sheet, the set of things laid out there, we need to ensure that we have a toolbox that is full of the tools necessary to repair the economy and to truly revitalize it. So, for example, I want to make sure they're not overlooked. We want to extend the sunsets on the entire suite of programs, the entire toolbox. In there are small business programs to help our most vulnerable businesses. We have a small business loan program called the Small Business Assistance Program, which started only about 5-6 years ago. We're asking for $1 million to replenish it. Of the 120 plus loans we've made, over half of them are to minority and women-owned businesses in Rhode Island. over that handful of years. It's so important that even as we're offering grant funding to businesses, we have the capacity to offer larger financing opportunities to businesses, $100,000 plus, for example, instead of smaller clips of $5,000, even $30,000. So we ask for support for that. Innovation vouchers that enables especially small businesses to link up with universities like URI, which has taken the largest subset of the vouchers, bless them, and help businesses figure out the next step for their products or their services. Rebuild and qualify jobs, brick and mortar program and job expansion program in the midst of this recession and emerging from it, helping to spark further expansions. I won't go into detail now, but very, very important. The Wavemaker Fellowship, helping to relieve student debt, especially when our younger professionals and all professionals are struggling to pay bills in the midst of this recession, despite our, on a relative basis, strong recovery. So that's what our package involves. I'm going to come to questions after I review the housing picture as briefly as I just did the economy. And then, of course, at your discretion, sir, open it up for questions, Mr. Chairman. Housing. Speaker Shekarshi has eloquently made the case. We are a state that has put some good measures in place. We have a superb housing agency in Rhode Island Housing, a great companion state agency in the Office of Housing and Community Development. We need to boost those efforts. We had a $65 million bond that, thanks to the electorate, was passed, and thanks to your support, got on the ballot to pass. But all of the other states in this region of the country have a sustainable funding stream. So we need to go and do that. Let me explain the reasoning, though, as quick background, same way I did for the economy, quick overview. The level of expenditure in Rhode Island relative to Massachusetts and Connecticut is approximately 1/5. They are 5 times and more of our expenditure. We are at 50% of the housing production level that we were in 2005. We are outstripping our own costs for housing sales on the single-family home front, on the condo front, by big percentages, like 25% increase in housing prices in the most recent interval. You get the picture. So we're investing less. We don't have a sustainable funding stream. We have a fragile situation because of COVID to exacerbate that situation. Our production levels are lower. So we've got to remedy those problems. So that's the unbelievably fast version of why we need to create a steady stream of funding. We also do believe that, as Speaker Shekarshi advocated very effectively and very accurately, we need to strengthen our leadership structure. And we propose to do so in 2 ways. One is Governor McKee, in tandem with Speaker Shekarshi, advocates the creation of a Deputy Secretary for Commerce for the purpose of focus upon housing, to coordinate among Rhode Island Housing, the Office of Housing and Community Development, the Executive Office of Housing, of Health and Human Service agencies and departments that work with supportive services and supportive and structured housing formats for our most vulnerable residents, coordinating across government with this new locus of activity. We fully endorse and, in fact, have placed in legislation, proposed before you, and budgeted for that position. We likewise propose that while the Housing Resources Commission has been invaluable in guiding the ship pertaining to housing over the years and decades, it was designed before most of what we've just described to you in the way of housing programming even existed. So we propose to create a slightly leaner HRC with a coordinating committee that cuts across government and ensures that we're intertwined in making policy judgments and advising on allocations made, for example, at Rhode Island Housing. And we want to place the chair of the new revised HRC and the new deputy secretary ex officio on the Rhode Island Housing Board to interlock it all and make sense of it in the way that I believe thematically Speaker Shekarshi advocates, and using the very staffing that he proposes. Extremely important on all of these fronts. In addition, Mike Tondra's on the line, our great leader of the Office of Housing and Community Development. OHCD is an office because it does not exist legislatively. It does not exist as a division of government. We propose to crystallize it and formalize it as a division of the government in this same package of legislation. I'm not saying that any of these changes are radical. They are not. They're surgical. But we think that they will help in our efficacy as we roll out these very substantial programs. Chris Hunsinger, working under Rhode Island Housing, has helmed the effort to move that $200 million forward for rental assistance. We have more tranches of funding coming. We're going to compete for every last dollar the feds put on the table. We must have a structure where we can credibly say to the federal government, we are capable of carrying this work out. So that is a quick intro, Mr. Chairman. What I want to do is dive right in on some of the questions asked. There was a series of questions, Mr. Chairman, including your own, sir, about the SBDF small business lending program established by the legislature. And I want to go ahead and answer some of those questions. One of the questions from a member of the committee was, essentially, is the set of revisions that we propose prospectively effective, or would it affect the already on board lender that is currently operational? And the answer is prospective. We're focused on future decision-making within SBDF and on prospective securing of new lenders for the purpose of carrying out small business lending for our most vulnerable businesses. Mr. Chairman, another of the questions was, why ensure that Rhode Island Commerce, the Commerce Corporation, has the ability to select the vendor, if you will, the lender in this particular case? And why did we revise some of the criteria? For example, this was not specifically asked, but we are asking for up to authority on the percentage of tax credit granted to the lender. We're asking for broader definition. There was a question about this. Broader definition of what would otherwise be in the mainstream terminology, CAPCOs conducting lending, but also expanding to community-based lenders, to what's frequently termed as a term of art, CDFIs, or community development finance institutions. Why are we expanding to those? So here's the answers to that cluster of questions. Because of the COVID crisis is the short answer. And the longer version of that answer is, because more businesses that were impacted by COVID are struggling, we want to make sure that the aid, the lending, is targeted to the businesses that were, in fact, most impacted, not to the healthiest of businesses in Rhode Island's economy. I'm not saying that inherently a lender simply aims to, do the wrong thing by any measure. But we do want to make sure that if we're spending precious Rhode Island state dollars, it's channeled to COVID-affected businesses, especially to the hospitality industry and other severely impacted industries that might be a little riskier and might otherwise not rise to the top. So Mr. Jesse Saglio, who's on the line and has been identified, is president of our Commerce Corporation. He has negotiated with the first lender, Enhanced Capital, for a package that goes beyond the verbatim requirements of the legislated SBDF, but is consistent with that program. And what we've negotiated for is that 75% of the fund they would establish, so $15 million, must go to COVID impacted businesses within 18 months. 25% of the fund must go to hospitality businesses within a year. There's a maximum loan amount of $1 million, so it can't all be concentrated in a larger business. I could go on from there, but my point is we want the ability going forward to rigorously and fairly, through principles established by the Commerce Corporation in adherence with the statutory rules, do similar things with lenders going forward, with an expanded set of possible lenders to give us, frankly, even more players on the field to help our businesses. Not just a small set of CAPCOs. By the way, we'd welcome more CAPCOs apply. Nothing against them, like Enhanced Capital. And we'd like to rigorously evaluate them to make absolutely sure they serve businesses affected by the COVID crisis. So that's an SBDF answer. Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure also to get back to the question about engineering certifications. We have Julietta Georgakis on the line from DBR, our superb deputy at DBR. Here I'm going to tag team Julietta. I see you've joined us visually as well. I know you've been with us all the way through. I'm going to say just this and ask you to clarify further. The questions pertain to the engineering degree and how one passes and how one serves with a professional engineer. An engineering degree requires passing a fundamentals exam, working for a professional engineer for 4 years, and then passing that exam. Engineering technology degrees are not allowed in Rhode Island. It's the PE degrees. And this change will allow engineering technology degrees as long as you work under a professional engineer for 8 years and pass the same exams. That's the short answer of what this measure is doing. Julietta, do you want to add some additional flourish and explanation?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer the question. I hope I understood it the way you expressed it. Just a brief overview. To become an engineer in Rhode Island, the number one path towards that is getting an engineering degree and then taking what we call a fundamentals exam. Once you pass that exam, you're able to work under the supervision of a licensed professional engineer for 4 years. Your question was whether or not it had to be the same professional engineer for the whole duration of the 4 years, or whether or not that person's specialty could be different from the specialty that you took in your undergraduate degree. And the answer is, if you, for example, get a degree in civil engineering, then you must apprentice or work under the supervision of a civil engineer. You can't work under the apprenticeship of, I call it an apprenticeship, it's a work experience type situation. You can't work under an electrical engineer. So how it works is you get your degree, you pass your fundamentals exam, you work for 4 years under a professional engineer, and then what you do is you take what we call a Principles and Practice of Engineering exam, and then you are able to come to the Department of Business Regulation to become a licensed professional engineer in your own right. The change that the Board of Engineers is proposing, and DBR, and I know Commerce certainly supports, is to allow engineering technology degrees to kind of be on the same footing as engineering degrees. You would still have to pass the same exams, the FE exams and the PE exam at the end, but we would require that someone with an engineering technology degree do 8 years, serve 8 years of experience being supervised by a professional engineer, as opposed to 4 years that an engineering degree requires currently. So that's kind of a brief overview. I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have, but I hope that explains it.
Chairman, I want to go ahead and address those questions regarding SBDF on the one hand, a cluster of questions, and a couple of key questions about the engineering certification. Why don't I pause there, if I may, sir, and see if were those helpful? Are there other questions about those two topics? May I do so, sir?
Yeah, you can continue. I don't think there are any questions on those two topics, and I did get a good explanation of the of what my question was, so I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. What we can do now, sir, in that case, is I've abbreviated my presentation on the package because I want to make sure to get to these questions. What I would welcome, if you would, sir, is either we can open it up for Q&A generally on the commerce component, or we can, given that our superb CEO at Rhode Island Housing, Carol Ventura, is on, she has some remarks that she has prepared for. Might she offer them, and then we'll just open it up for questions on both sides of our commerce package, economic development and housing?
Yes, let's go to Carol.
Perfect. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. It goes without saying that we strongly support the governor's emphasis on housing and his fiscal year 22 budget. Article 16 of the budget lays out the governor's priorities and introduces critical resources we need for housing investment in Rhode Island. For years, we have faced a serious shortage of affordable housing and housing productions of all kinds across the board remains at historically low levels. This lack of supply is translating into higher sale prices, both on the single family and multifamily side. There are fewer homes for sale, and there are bidding wars happening every day across the state with people wanting to buy single family homes. There's low vacancy rates while households continue to struggle to pay their housing expenses. Investing in housing now is more important than ever. You've heard the details of the governor's proposals. I'd like to highlight just a couple of provisions included in this article. We strongly support the creation of a dedicated revenue stream for housing production. Having a predictable funding resource allows developers to create a pipeline of developments and encourages early investment in site control and pre-development activities. The Secretary touched on the fact that Rhode Island is the only state in New England that doesn't have a permanent funding stream for housing production. We've relied heavily on voter-approved housing bonds that all of you have supported, that while important to housing production is really an unreliable resource. And even considering the funding that has been provided through the housing bonds, millions of dollars, as a state, we still invest far less in housing than our neighbors. We urge you to support this critical new resource for housing. We understand that the governor will be proposing an amendment to Article 16 that clarifies how the real estate conveyance tax applies to affordable housing properties. As of 2015, transfers of certain ownership interests in properties became subject to the conveyance tax. And this change has had unintended consequences for our affordable housing properties, particularly those financed with the federal low-income housing tax credit. In these developments, ownership is typically transferred from the initial investor to a developer at the end of the initial affordability period, which is generally 15 years. I've provided you with a description of the typical transaction process with my testimony. In effect, affordable properties may be taxed twice, once when the developer acquires a property, and then again when the equity investor exits the development partnership. This places a significant financial burden on affordable properties, especially those developed by our nonprofit community partners. We ask that you support this amendment. In addition to Article 16, the committee heard other housing legislation tonight. I want to thank the Speaker for focusing on the housing challenges facing our state and the people of our state. Including his legislation to prioritize housing with the creation of a new deputy secretary position specifically focused on housing and coordinating all of the housing resources across the state. I look forward to working with the Speaker and with all of you to ensure that all Rhode Islanders have a safe and affordable place to call home. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your comments. Excuse me. To my colleagues who are on the line, do any of you have any questions of Carol or of Stefan? Okay, I'm looking at that, and no questions from anyone else here. Okay, so I think that ends the questions. There are a number of other individuals that you have with you, I think, and I just want to make sure before we get to the phones we don't overlook anyone else who wanted to make a comment on anything that they heard tonight or something like that. I think we're done with the questions part that I can see at this time. Okay.
And from the administration side, I believe we're all set. Joe, would you agree?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Chairman. I'll remain on the line, but that concludes any of the remarks that we have.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you and Seth for doing a great job. I know it's not easy, but you guys are built for it. So good luck out there. Okay. All right. So what we'll do now, we'll go to the phones. And again, This is where you express either you are for or against either one of the bills or the articles, and try and keep your comments as brief as possible.
Chairman, this is Carlos. I just wanted to be marked present and also affirmative on holding the bills for further study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So noted. Okay. Bill Walsh, you're on the line, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bill Walsh here on behalf of the Rhode Island Builders Association. Appreciative with a lot of these housing proposals here before us this evening. And I'm happy to run through them all quick, respectful of your time. I'd certainly like to begin by thanking Speaker Shekarchi, the House leadership in this committee, for your continued support and prioritization of housing policies and resources. H5951 is a continuation of this commitment to improving housing for everyone in Rhode Island. Having this senior official focused on housing initiatives and coordinating policy and resources will significantly aid us to overcome the barriers that confront housing development in the state today. So we thank the Speaker and all of you for supporting this and the rest of the housing proposals. Regarding the conveyance tax reforms, we applaud Rep Slater and Rep Speakman for their efforts to increase dedicated funding to affordable housing development. REBA did submit written testimony on expressing some concerns with Section 3 of H5687, and we were happy to hear of the intention to remove that. So we thank Rep Speakman for addressing that issue, and we certainly thank Rep Slater and Speakman for their efforts on supporting affordable housing development. And REBA also submitted written testimony as it relates to all the varying provisions in Article 16, so I'll leave that for the committee to read. And with that, we just thank everyone for prioritizing housing, and we wish everyone to have a great evening.
Thank you, Bill. We appreciate your comments. Take good care of yourself and stay safe now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have Brenda on the line.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is Brenda Clement from Housing Works, Rhode Island.
Great. You're on the line for a couple of minutes to explain your position for or against.
I am, and I'm here with great happiness to support a number of the bills before you in the Article 16, and also Representative Slater and Representative Speakman's bill around the dedicated funding stream. We have also, on both those bills, submitted some written testimony that goes into more details on some of the other states and our comparison to other states around dedicated funding stream bills. But suffice it to say, we are very happy to see finally within the state budget and also leadership leading the way on investing and funding in a regular dedicated funding stream for housing production. Rhode Island, we have done numerous reports through our annual fact book that shows that we need to be producing thousands of units each year, and we are only producing hundreds of units each year with the amount of funding and money that we have available to us. And so we urge you to work forward either through the budget articles and or through the bills before you to make sure that a dedicated funding stream is included in that. I think we all agree that it's never been more evident during this global pandemic that a home is the foundation of our health and economic and community well-being, and we have an opportunity at this time to make sure that we have a place where all of our residents are able to live in safe and healthy and affordable homes and thriving communities. So I thank the bill sponsors and the Speaker for his leadership. Also, I wanted to make a few comments and just to give a little bit of historical context to the Speaker Shekarchi's bill around creating a dedicated Secretary of Commerce position.
You can, but you have to be brief, though, Brenda. You can do that, but please be brief.
been, yes, housing advocates have been pushing for a leader on housing. We think that this is potentially a very good start. Back to when Rep Slater's father was on the committee, we were talking about housing bills. The creation of HRC was a Senate creation led by many leaders many years ago, and so we think it's a good start. We do have some tweaks that we would like to think. We want that position to have all the authority that it needs to do their job, but we think it's a very good step forward, and we're glad that the Speaker has proposed such legislation, and happy to work with you and members of the committee to address our thoughts and comments. So thanks again for the time, and thanks again for your hard work on this committee.
Thank you, and you do sound happy, Brenda. I'm glad for you.
Happier, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Courtney, are you on?
I am. Good
Hi.
evening, Chair Abney.
Thank you so much. You're on for a couple of minutes, please.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to the members of the Finance Committee. My name is Courtney Nicolato, and I'm proud to serve as President and CEO of the United Way of Rhode Island. The United Way of Rhode Island is in strong support of the creation of a dedicated funding stream for housing, included in Article 16 of this year's proposed budget. We're also in support of the standalone legislation in this regard, House Bill 5687 by Representative Speakman, as well as House Bill 5456 by Representative Slater. We're also in support of House Bill 5951 to create a Deputy Secretary of Housing and Homelessness by Speaker Joe Sicarci, and we're grateful for his leadership and his commitment to housing. The United Way of Rhode Island recently released the Live United 2025 plan, which states unequivocally that housing is a fundamental human right, and today, far too many Rhode Islanders are homeless or on the brink of homelessness. Our 5-year goal is to double the number of Rhode Island cities and towns that are meeting the 10% affordable housing threshold. And as Rep. Baginski mentioned, 6 cities and towns is nearly not enough. The creation of a dedicated funding stream for affordable housing is a positive step towards meeting this goal. Article 16 will allow $6.9 million to be placed into a housing production fund. That fund will provide funding for opt-in municipal partnerships to develop housing, provide technical assistance, and subsidize local education costs and increases. As you heard from Carol Ventura and Secretary Pryor and so many others, Rhode Island is the only state in New England without a dedicated funding stream for affordable housing production. This is not because it's not seen as important to the public. In fact, affordable housing has strong public support throughout our state. As we all know, 65% of voters just approved the affordable housing bond. We also know that housing and affordable housing plays an incredibly critical component as part of the larger economic development strategy to strengthen Rhode Island's economy. Our state cannot succeed without adequate housing for both our workforce and our community at large. It has been projected by Roger Williams University and Housing Works that our state needs to add as many as 40,000 new housing units over the next decade just to stabilize our population and workforce. And from United Way's perspective, we hear this literally daily from Rhode Islanders who know and talk about their struggles. When they call 211, our 24-hour information and referral line, we hear the story because 98,000 plus requests for housing came through 211 just last year. The data and the stories and the perspective from Rhode Islanders that we hear loud and clear that they're struggling to pay for their housing. They recognize there's a distinctive recognition of the need that there are nearly not enough affordable options. The need for low-income, affordable housing is also clear in this data. While the housing crisis existed before COVID-19, the pandemic further demonstrated just how critical it is to have a home. Our home became our offices, our classrooms, our places of worship, our places of healing. We have to recognize that staying in a home as prescribed is preventative medicine and has really just reiterated the importance of housing. United Way has taken a leadership role as lead funder and convener in the successful 2021 Yes on 3 campaign, the 2016 Yes on 7 campaigns, have also supported the 2012 and 2006 housing bill campaigns. These have all passed by large margins, and the state has gone to the bond market. We can't keep going to the bond market to put this incredible commitment and in continuous investment in our state budget. Creating a dedicated funding stream for affordable housing development changes how we do business and will help solve this issue. We are holding the state and ourselves accountable to make these changes.
Another minute, Courtney.
No problem, sir. We need a state plan, our state that we can follow and be held accountable against, that is rich in public and private contribution and perspective. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, and the United Way respectfully request that you support and the committee supports the creation of a dedicated funding stream and all the bills mentioned up above, specifically increasing the capacity of our housing sector by building out a robust division of housing and community development. Thank you to each and every one of you for your commitment to our community and your commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of Rhode Islanders.
Thank you for your commitment, Corey. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
I think we have Jennifer.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Jennifer. This is Chairman Abney, House Finance. You're on for a couple of minutes, please.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Abney. So my name is Jennifer Hawkins. I'm the Executive Director of One Neighborhood Builders, a community development corporation that works to develop housing and address the root causes for health disparities. We've developed over 600 homes in our time. So I'm calling in strong support for House Bill number 5687, introduced by Representative Speakman. But I also just want to note that I'm especially grateful for Speaker Shekarchi for identifying housing as a key priority during this legislative session. He really paved the way for the introduction of Representative Speakman's bill. And also want to note gratitude for the governor for including housing proposals that he recently released, including the Conveyance Tax legislation that you are hearing tonight. So the bill number 5687, I believe, matches Senate Bill 365, and I believe the Senate colleagues introduced some sub-A language, and in my written testimony that I submitted, I proposed specific changes to the legislation that I would hope you would consider and mirror the Senate sub-A. And a permanent funding stream, a predictable and permanent funding stream that this conveyance tax legislation will allow will go a long way to sparking production. At One Neighborhood Builders, I've directed my real estate team to secure options for as many parcels of land and properties that they can, so that as soon as this legislation is enacted and signed into law, that we can start getting shovels in the ground. I'd also like to speak on support, but with some caution, about House Bill number 5951, which would create the position of the Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Housing. As the Speaker, continues to make housing a priority, I really applaud him for adding a state-level position that would focus exclusively on housing policy and coordinating with state agencies across the cities and towns to elevate housing as an issue. However, I just want to make sure that entity and that position has budgetary authority and responsibility and has the personnel necessary to succeed.
Another minute, Jennifer.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chairman Abney. I really appreciate your time, and have a great evening.
We absolutely appreciate your time, too. Take good care of yourself.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Christina on the line. Christina?
Hello, good evening, Chair Abney and members of the House Finance Committee. My name is Christina Contreras-Fox. My pronouns are she, her, eka, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. We envision a state where no Rhode Islander experiences homelessness. And the Coalition is a proud member of Homes RI I'm here to give our testimony in support of this agenda tonight. Simply put, housing ends homelessness, and we do not have nearly enough housing in Rhode Island. One of the root causes of homelessness in our state continues to be the growing gap between the skyrocketing cost of housing and continued wage stagnation. And Rhode Island's housing scarcity, which was a crisis even before COVID hit, is a key factor here. Before the pandemic, our state was on track to end individual homelessness by 2054 and family homelessness by 2025. So that's more years of kids sleeping in cars, more decades of our neighbors living in tents, and that all traces back in large part to our housing scarcity. And that urgency has only grown over the past year. Since COVID, we've seen an over 90% increase in the number of people staying overnight unsheltered. So people who are experiencing homelessness and are staying outdoors, living in cars, living in tents. Over 400 people in the past month alone reported staying outdoors overnight unsheltered. But providing more shelter is not enough. And if the need continues to grow, it will completely overwhelm the shelter system. The solution here is consistently producing and preserving an adequate supply of safe, secure, affordable housing. So the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless urges the General Assembly to act quickly to invest and construct more safe, healthy, affordable homes. So much incredible progress has been made in spite of all of the hardship and challenges we've experienced for this past year. But this is certainly not momentum that should rest. The stakes are just far too high. So thank you very much to all of you for your leadership on this issue, and we just encourage you to keep going. And these bills here before you are an essential and important start, because without an adequate supply of safe and healthy homes and investment in maintaining that housing supply, like making sure we're not only producing more housing, but maintaining the stock that we have now. Without this, we will simply never end homelessness in Rhode Island. Thank you very much for your attention tonight.
Thank you, Christina, for your communication with us and for your advocacy for the homeless. We appreciate that very much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful evening.
Have a great one yourself. Hello, you're on House Finance. Is this Melina Lodge?
It is. Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Hi, Melina. You have 4 bills you're testifying on tonight?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Again, you have 4 bills, so I'll be a little bit more lenient with the time, but please be as brief as possible.
I will be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Melina Lodge. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Network of Rhode Island. Our organization represents 17 nonprofit affordable housing developers and community development corporations who serve low-income Rhode Islanders from Westerly to Woonsocket. Collectively, our membership has developed over 15,000 long-term, deed-restricted affordable housing units and are responsible for nearly 70% of the production activity that was generated by the 2006, 12, and 16 housing bond. So given this, I don't think it will be any surprise to you that we are pleased to support House Bill 5456, 5687, as well as Budget Article 16, all of which seek to increase the state's investments in developing and preserving affordable housing through the creation of a dedicated funding stream. In the interest of time, I won't list all the ways that this resource is critically needed, but I will say that if we have any hope of resolving the housing crisis that has plagued our state for at least the last 20 years, we desperately need this tool in our toolkit, and we really appreciate the acknowledgement of that by including this legislation as well as in the budget article. I've submitted written testimony as to the specifics of each of the bills, but I did want to take a moment to call out 2 vitally important components in House Bill 5687 that sets it slightly apart from the others. Firstly, that bill does allow for a portion of the funding generated to be used for project-based rental assistance, which would actually allow us to better serve Rhode Island's lowest income households who are often still priced out of affordable housing because it's simply too expensive for them. And secondly, it makes an important language clarification within the current conveyance tax law as it relates to investor exits from an affordable housing partnership. This language correction is an important part of ensuring that our state investments are fully leveraged and that we are able to attract private investment into our state. It's rather technical, so you can read more about it in my written testimony. Lastly, I wanted to articulate our support for the Speaker's Bill 5951 and thank him for his recognition of the importance of the state playing a role in strategic planning and implementation of housing policies and programs that help us ensure we can meet our long-term housing goals, increase coordination among housing initiatives across state departments, and expand the capacity of the Housing Resources Commission through the investment of more defined leadership. The housing community, as my colleague Brenda Clement mentioned, has been asking for these things for a very long time, so we are incredibly pleased to see them reflected here today. And we hope there will be a continued commitment to make sure that there is inclusion of a diverse voice and broad representation as we restructure this vital office. With that, I will say thank you for your time and the opportunity to provide testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions folks might have.
Thank you, Melina, for your time. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're welcome. Okay. Hi, Phil.
Yes.
You have 4 bills you're testifying on tonight, correct?
Yeah, just, 2 in support and 2 that we're concerned with, and I'll try to be quick. I've been scratching stuff out because I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, okay. You're a good guy. You're on.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yes.
You can begin.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good evening, Chairman Abney and committee members. I am Phil Tedesco, the CEO of the Rhode Island Association of Realtors. I wanted to speak in support of H5951 and H5456, but also express some concerns with Section 6 of Budget Article 16 and 5687. So RIAR would like to express our support for Speaker Shikarchi's housing package that aims to improve the accessibility of housing for all Rhode Islanders. Rhode Island needs a leading voice to articulate the policies that will improve access to housing on all levels. And without a point person who is empowered with coordinating and executing a critical facet of our economy, Rhode Islanders will continue their struggles to access housing opportunities, whether owned or rented. So we respectfully urge this committee and the House of Representatives to support H5951. So realtors across Rhode Island appreciate your commitment over the last 2 years to improving access to home ownership and affordable housing. But we are concerned that Rhode Island lacks a long-term vision to address housing needs at all levels. We are encouraged, however, that the House leadership will commence commissions to examine housing in our state. That is why we strongly supported the House Bills 5950 and 5953. We believe that prior to considering any tax increase on Rhode Island homeowners, the House should take a holistic approach to addressing housing. It is true that Rhode Island is the only New England state that has not created a dedicated revenue stream to fund affordable housing, which RIAR supports. What is more surprising is that the state has allowed the crisis to continue for decades without responsibly spending taxpayers' dollars on housing at both the local and state levels of government. As you can see in my written testimony, I provided written testimony for both Article 16, Section 6, as well as H5456 and H5687. Rhode Islanders from every region in our state are struggling to afford medium-priced house, and that number continues to rise monthly. According to statewide MLS, the median price of a single-family home has increased 67% since 2010, shutting home buyers out of a competitive real estate market and burdening tenants with higher rents. So RIAR has supported the concept of creating a dedicated revenue stream to fund housing during the last 3 legislative sessions. In fact, a recent poll conducted by our association revealed that 6 in 10 Rhode Islanders say they favor using all revenue generated from the state's real estate conveyance tax to tax and fund housing programs. Yet Rhode Island only invests 13% of that revenue, which is generated from the transfer tax. This is why RIAR strongly supports H5456, which would require the state to fund affordable housing projects using the full state allocation. We believe this critical investment in our future will lessen borrowing costs of future generations. I think you just saw that only 6 municipalities are meeting the statutory 10% requirement, which is concerning. And we can agree that the state has not done nearly enough to address affordable housing crisis throughout Rhode Island, which was why we really request to work with you as partners to make sure that this is addressed holistically. We continue to remain concerned with these one-off proposals, though, like Article 16 and H5687. They're not creating an all-inclusive approach that's necessary. And then we don't really know the true impacts that they're going to have on the industry and market as well as supply. The governor's proposal also exempts commercial real estate, which isn't equitable, and specifically targets homeowners. So when we looked at this last year, the governor's budget established lofty revenue targets based on conveyance tax increase proposals, which only projected production of another 250 units per year. When we looked at Housing RI's 2016 report, it said more than 30,000 rental units of affordable housing will be needed by 2026. So even during the best economic times, this new tax will fall far short of fulfilling Rhode Island's affordable housing needs, creating just 1,500 units of the required 30,000 in that 6-year period. So we're really concerned that tying the housing trust fund to economic market conditions may reduce the reliability of this revenue source, and it's not predictable, really. So our National Association is a great resource. Provides lawmakers opportunities to dive into data and could assist you in making some of these decisions. So we respectfully ask the committee press pause on any new housing tax increases and convene the House Commission to study land use and low to moderate income housing. We work together to create a holistic approach to create housing affordability and opportunities in our state. It's also our hope that the state begins to budget responsibly and listen to Rhode Islanders who want more of their current tax dollars invested in housing. So again, thank you for the opportunity to testify on these important items today.
Thank you for your testimony. It was great, and we appreciate it, and it's important to us. So thank you very much, Phil. Okay, I think we have 2 more guests, according to my records on the line. Rita?
Hi, yes.
Good, how you doing, Rita? You're on one bill tonight, so you're up for your short comments, please.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Chairman Abney, committee members, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think I know several of you. If you don't know, I own and operate a real estate consulting firm here in Rhode Island. I've been doing this for going on almost 15 years now. So my only comments tonight with regards to Budget Article 16, Section 6 relating to housing, is just simply that it seems quite arbitrary. I appreciate the intent behind the increase. Obviously, I think an affordable housing deficit here is a huge issue that needs to be addressed. I just think that the way the governor's gone about it in this budget is a little bit arbitrary, and I think just a less indiscriminate means of executing the intent is available. You know, you could dedicate a more substantial percentage of our current transfer tax revenue for affordable housing. I think that would just be an easier transition before we consider creation of a new tax burden on homeowners. I think to that end, I'd just encourage support of House Bill 5456. I don't know if you guys are discussing that tonight as well. I guess I would also just mention that I think a closer look at successful policies in place in other states would encourage a more productive dialogue pertaining to the matter. Based on my own cursory look at other states and what they do, I think there's some other really good options out there that could approach this matter a little bit more mindfully and a little bit more sustainably. I think that's it. That's all I really have to say. I know you guys are probably exhausted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we just want to make sure we get everybody in. Thank you so much for your comments, Rita. We
All right, have a
we
good
have
night.
boundless energy, I think. Okay. I think we have the last call of the evening coming up, I believe. Stephanie Geller?
Geller.
Geller, okay, I got it right the first time. I should have. Okay, great. You're on for 3 bills from Kids Count, so let's get to your brief comments, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Stephanie Geller, Deputy Director of Rhode Island Kids Count. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony. Rhode Island Kids Count strongly supports Budget Article 16, House Bill 5687, and House Bill 5456. All of which would create a dedicated funding stream to increase the supply of safe, healthy, and affordable homes for families, seniors, people with disabilities, and working people. Rhode Island has an urgent housing shortage. The supply of housing is not keeping up with demand, and the cost of housing is outpacing wages. Even with the bond passage, Rhode Island significantly underinvests in housing production compared to our neighboring states. At $20.45 per capita spending on housing, Rhode Island invests less than half of what Maine spends and about 1/5 as much as Connecticut and Massachusetts. In fact, we're the only state in the Northeast, including New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, as well as all the New England states, that does not have a dedicated revenue source for this purpose. Permanent, stable funding will help us narrow this investment gap and build the homes our state needs to support families and our economy. We at Rhode Island Kids Count know that poor quality, unaffordable, and crowded housing has a negative effect on children's physical health, development, and emotional well-being, and on a family's ability to meet their children's basic needs. Children who live in families with housing cost burdens often live in low-quality and overcrowded housing and move frequently, all of which has been linked to increased absenteeism, lower educational achievement, and increased risk of homelessness. We'd like to thank Governor McKee for including a dedicated source of funding for affordable housing in his proposed fiscal year 2022 budget, and thank Representative Slater and Beekman for sponsoring bills that also address this important need. We urge you to create a dedicated funding stream for affordable housing in Rhode Island in the budget. These funds are needed to ensure that we have safe, healthy, affordable homes for our most vulnerable residents, including low-income children and families, seniors, people with disabilities, and working people. As many others have said, the need for safe and affordable housing has become even more apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is urgent that we address these needs now and plan for the ongoing investments in housing that will be needed in the future. Thanks for the opportunity to provide this testimony and for all you have done over the past year to support the passage of the Affordable Housing Bond and the Source of Income Bill and the work to address Rhode Island's affordable housing crisis. Thank you again.
Stephanie, thank you for your testimony. It's well appreciated. Stay safe out there.
You too. Have a good night.
I think that exhausted the witness list. I'm going to overrule myself on something I said earlier, and that is I closed the hearing on some bills, but they're not closed until we hear all of the witnesses. So now I will officially close the 3 bills that we had. I want to make sure we do it specifically and correctly. So that's Bill 5456 by Rep Vice Chair Slater, 5687 by Rep Speakman, and Bill 5951 by Speaker Sakarchi. Those bills now are officially, the hearings on those bills are officially closed. So if there's no further questions of anyone from tonight, that ends the business of the Finance Committee. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for coming out, and thank you for staying.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.